When I started engaging in social media about 12 years ago, I didn't really care about Twitter, because I was more interested in the opportunity to socialize with my friends than in watching what some celebrities had to share with the world when they had nothing better to do. But over the last years, and at least since the President of the United States, a title which in the past had been referred to as the most powerful man in the world, started to use the site as the central platform to communicate with both his allies and his enemies, it became the number one thing everyone, from politicians and journalists to ordinary people from all different political backgrounds, used to share their opinion about anything. This of course makes it the perfect place for tons of bullshit and fake information flying around. But before finally joining the site about a month ago, I thought that the majority of people could actually differentiate between bullshit and non-bullshit. I really did. I was wrong. People actually believe a lot of things on Twitter without even bothering to double check any of it. This is bad, of course. But there's a difference between being the one who believes everything he reads and the one who puts out fake information to trick people into having a certain opinion about something. Today's video is about those people. About people who put out misleading information either intentionally or unknowingly, and by that trying to manipulate people into sharing their opinion, no matter what. It's a compilation of 10 tweets which annoyed me so much that I had to do a little research about their claims and most of the time proving them wrong. I know there are many far more hypocritical tweets out there who didn't make it into this compilation. The tweets in this compilation are just not so much talked about than others, and most of them have a base of followers who doesn't seem to care if their claims are true or not. So if I only reach one person who starts questioning things he or she reads on Twitter because of this video, it was already worth it. Number 10. Gordon Wright replying to the Bradford file. This tweet only makes number 10 in this list mainly because this guy doesn't seem to intentionally spread misinformation. It just seems to have no clue at all what he's talking about. The discussion he's participating in was about why the media didn't engage into what the Bradford file called panic when other devastating things happened before. The contribution Gordon made to this discussion was the following. Fatalities in the USA. Swine flu of 2009, 12,469, less than 1%. Regular flu average 30 to 60,000, less than 1%. COVID-19 projected 60,000, less than 1%. Vehicle fatalities 35,000, less than 1%. Heart conditions 647,000, less than 1%. Where was the media panic and political pandemic? Oh, Trump wasn't president. Well, as I immediately pointed out, his comparisons are misleading on several levels. First, he compared the death count of 12,400 people during the swine flu to the more than 40,000 deaths of COVID-19, leaving out the fact that those 40,000 people died in 12 weeks, while the 12,000 deaths during the swine flu happened over a period of 12 months. That doesn't mean that those 12k deaths are not devastating at all, but you can by no means make the point that both diseases should have been treated equally by the media. Second, he left out the fact that there has been more or less effective treatment of the flu for decades, while there is still no cure in sight for COVID-19. This makes this new disease far more dangerous at this point. It makes it much more important to prevent it from spreading unnecessarily. Third, he makes the claim that the projected fatalities of COVID-19 are about 60,000. This information probably comes from a model the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation used to predict COVID-19 fatalities, and which predicted a final number of deaths around 60k on April 8. This number, however, has, of course, been adapted several times already, with projections varying from 40k up to 160k. Also, those models are based on the assumption that there will be strict social distancing measurements in place in the near future. So you can't just compare it with the projections of deaths for other diseases where there were no social distancing measurements at all. At this moment, the US is at 47,000 fatalities, with still around 2,000 new fatalities each day. To assume that the final death toll of COVID-19 will be only 60,000 is optimistic, to say the least. And finally, he makes the argument, which has been repeated over and over again, that there are still less people dying from corona than from heart diseases, and there are thousands of people dying in car accidents each year without a media outcry. At this point, I'm just repeating what thousands of people have said already, but there's a big problem with this comparison. Someone dying in a car accident doesn't affect your chance in dying in one at all. Someone dying from a heart disease doesn't make you more vulnerable for heart diseases. COVID-19 is extremely contagious, so of course those numbers are far more relevant to you than the victim numbers of accidents and heart diseases. Also, people with heart diseases are more likely to die from it when they get infected by corona, but I don't want to spend too much time on you, Gordon Wright. So I'm moving on. So I replied to him and told him about all of his misleading information, but seeing his response, he still didn't seem to get it. He pointed out that there were several severe illnesses like polio and smallpox, which caused far less people to die than corona when there was no effective treatment for them back in the days. So let me get this straight. You're pointing out that other diseases had less fatalities than corona when there were almost no vaccines and when the medical situation was far worse in the first half of the 20th century than it is today, and by that you want to tell me that corona is not more dangerous than that? Think again. But as I said, I'm not sure if this is a case of hypocrisy, because he just seems to genuinely not know what he's talking about. So I guess it's only number 10 of the week. Number 9. Trump 2020, Pence 2024. This guy, whose username is the impersonated nightmare of any Democrat out there and who identifies as a white privileged Christian, seemingly hoping to offend me but really doesn't, wanted to be edgy about the tax return controversy concerning Joe Biden and Hunter Biden. He tweeted the following: "Questions more important than seeing Trump's income tax. Maybe we should see all of the Bidens. Here are the facts. In contrast to President Trump, Joe Biden made his tax returns of the last years public on his personal website. Hunter Biden already handed over his tax returns to the Senate in February, followed by no legal action of any side. President Trump, as the first president since Richard Nixon, refuses to do so to this day. Coincidence? I don't know. And I don't care if he does, it really doesn't matter. But if you want to manipulate people into thinking that people like Joe and Hunter Biden are worse than the president on this matter, even if it's just with a meant to be funny comment, you should check the facts first." Or maybe this guy is just talking about another person named Biden, I don't know. Number 8. Kayleigh McEnany, press secretary of the White House. I don't know how to pronounce her name. Over the last 3 years, the press secretaries of the White House started showing noticeable similarities to speakers of North Korean totalitarian leader Kim Jong-un, repeatedly praising the huge accomplishments of Trump, the great leader, and his efforts in single-handedly ensuring the well-being of his people. So it's not surprising who Ms. Inani pointed out as the person responsible for the huge number of ventilators in the state of New York. She tweeted the following: "President Donald Trump has moved heaven and earth to ensure ventilators get to where they are needed most. Hard-hit states like New York have even had enough ventilators to send excess supplies to other states in need. The efforts Donald Trump made for distributing ventilators over the country might be up for debate. More important, however, is the intentional distortion of context the press secretary used to support her narrative. The reason Governor Cuomo had this number of ventilators is even mentioned by Cuomo in his tweet she is referring to. Other governors stepped up when New York was facing difficulties, and Cuomo was just returning the favor. So this particular excess is not due to Donald Trump handing out ventilators, but to different states helping each other out. What she also fails to mention is that President Trump's central scapegoat, China, sent 1,000 ventilators to New York, while Trump was still negotiating if the state would get any ventilators at all. So next time, Kayleigh, when you try to tell people of New York who was responsible for saving their lives during this pandemic, you might want to mention China as well, don't you?" Yeah, I know you don't. Number 7. Timcast replying to Fareed Zakaria. Timcast, the disaffected liberal, is already famous for distorting and cherry-picking information to support his rather conservative narratives and to please his more than 600,000 followers. This time he repeated the same claim millions of people have already made about corona being only as dangerous as the common flu. But other than Gordon Wright, I am sure that he knows exactly what he's talking about and that he intentionally left out information just because he knows that his audience will eat it up. He tweeted the following: "But is the fatality rate lower due to good hospitalization and availability? At any rate, this now makes it seem like a bad flu, with the difference being when you get the flu, you get slammed. Some get COVID and don't notice." A couple of things are wrong with the statement, possibly leading to several dangerously misleading conclusions. First of all, he just assumes that all people who get the flu show symptoms. This is simply not the case. Different studies suggest that from 20% up to 70% of people who are infected with the flu show no symptoms at all. If you want to compare mortality rates between the flu and COVID-19, you have to acknowledge that the mortality rate of the flu is much lower than estimated as well. Timcast doesn't, of course. Secondly, not only the mortality rate of a virus is important, but the contagiousness is too. Studies show that even considering these new developments, people are still more likely to infect people with COVID-19 than with the common flu. This makes it much harder to contain it, and by that makes more rigorous measures necessary. And most importantly, there is still no cure for COVID-19, while for the common flu there is at least a certain infrastructure, flu shots and other treatments intact. So if you get slammed by COVID-19, as Timcast puts it, you are pretty much fucked. So instead of just labeling it as a bad flu, you should just acknowledge that you have to be more careful at this moment than when dealing with the common flu. Maybe in a year or so, when there hopefully is some kind of vaccine, you don't have to give a shit anymore. But right now, stop encouraging your fans into unnecessarily putting themselves into danger. Number 6. Guy P. Benson replying to Joe Biden. This tweet is particularly interesting if you want to talk about hypocrisy, because of the fact that both people in this thread are hypocrites, even as they clearly oppose each other. On the one hand, we have Guy P. Benson, a commonly known Fox News contributor and the co-author of the book End of Discussion. And on the other hand, we have one of the weakest candidates the Democratic Party could come up with for the upcoming election, former Vice President Joe Biden. So the discussion they were engaged in was as follows. Joe Biden. Donald Trump is not responsible for COVID-19, but he is responsible for our slow, uncoordinated response. Experts say that if he had acted 2 weeks earlier, more lives could have been saved. Trump failed to take swift action and we are paying the price. Guy Benson. You were holding campaign rallies into the second week of March. Fauci has said that the very first time he and Birx recommended major action, POTUS accepted and implemented that advice. The federal response is fair game. The 2 weeks earlier hypothetical is cheap and hypocritical. So let's talk about Joe Biden first. Yes, it's true that he kept rallying even at a time when the CDC and the WHO clearly recommended not to do so. So if he wants to effectively criticize his upcoming opponent, he shouldn't blame him about something he himself kept doing at that time. Blatant hypocrisy right there. Still, Mr. Benson is guilty of the same crime when saying that Donald Trump had already implemented those recommendations. When looking at the timeline, Joe Biden announced the cancellation of his rallies on March 10th. Donald Trump cancelled his upcoming rallies 1 day later on March 11th. You call yourself a journalist, Mr. Benson. I'm pretty sure you were aware of the timeline when putting out this tweet, but of course you didn't care, because your audience was probably not aware of it. You actively decided to put your political agenda over the truth to support your narrative. Number 5. White House government. If I'm talking about hypocritical tweets of Joe Biden, of course I have to mention Donald Trump's hypocritical tweets as well. To be honest, I probably could fill a complete top 100 list of hypocritical tweets just by Donald Trump. But most of them are being talked about anyways. So I'm just talking about one of them that has pissed me as a non-American off the most. And of course, it's a part of one of his notorious press conferences. In this video, he states the following.
Because of our early and aggressive action, we have avoided the tragedy of healthcare rationing and deadly shortfalls that have befallen many other nations which, wherever possible, we are helping.
As someone who follows media sources all around the world, I keep asking myself which fucking countries he is talking about. The US has by far the highest number of cases, by far the highest number of people in intensive care, and by far the highest number of deaths. Yes, in Italy and Spain they have more cases per 1 million at the moment, but their curve is already sinking, while the US curve is still far from that point. The only statistics the US is still not leading yet is the death toll per 1 million inhabitants, but with around 2,000 new deaths each day, they are pretty much catching up already. Mr. President, stop pretending that you did a better job during this pandemic than any other leader in the world. You didn't. And it doesn't seem like this is going to change anytime soon. Number 4. Larry G. Putnam. This guy made number 4 in this list mainly because of its genuinely unique response when confronted with the misleading information he was spreading. I can't show you the whole thread because this guy was very quick in blocking me, but luckily I was able to take a screenshot before he did that. Initially, he just posted a picture about how the Democratic Party was politicizing the coronavirus. You can surely make a statement saying that someone is politicizing this crisis. I guess everyone is trying to make the best for himself out of a devastating situation like this. But hinting that this motive is exclusively exploited by the Democrats is, if you bother to check more than one news source, misleading to say the least. I myself then did nothing further than mentioning several occasions in which President Trump himself, not a Democrat, tried politicizing this crisis and gave a few links on events that even Fox News was accidentally exposing. Like any rational person who is willing to engage into a serious discussion, his reply was the following. You believe it crap, Rex? Because you're so smart but you don't do a damn thing but botch your president too? He then proceeded to call me a Chinese communist and then immediately blocked me. Congratulations, you won the argument. Larry G Putnam, you're not only voluntarily cherry-picking information to bullshit your 30,000 followers, when being exposed about that, the only thing you can come up with is denial that other information exists, anger that someone else has a different opinion than yourself, and cowardness in avoiding any further discussion by just running away with your eyes and ears shut. If that is not the definition of a hypocrite, I don't know what is. Number 3. Ben Shapiro replying to Breaking 911. Actually, I'm a fan of Ben Shapiro. I really believe that he's a very smart guy and a rhetoric genius who can figure stuff out more quickly than most of us. But the longer I followed his Twitter feed, the more it became obvious that he just allows himself to act only smart to a certain point, at which he's not in danger of saying something his rather conservative fanbase doesn't like. He's smarter than most of them, so he knows exactly where the line is and how much he can get away with. Last Saturday he tweeted the following. Breaking 911. Los Angeles fills Venice skate park with sand amid coronavirus outbreak. Ben Shapiro. It looks like it was super important to do this as soon as possible, since there is nobody in view for blocks in this video in the middle of the day. There are several misleading things in this tweet. First of all, this didn't happen as soon as possible. People kept violating social distancing guidelines at the skate park for weeks. In other parks, like a skate park in San Clemente, people kept ignoring warning signs or even fencing, so the government went with the same measurement. It doesn't cost the state a huge amount of money and the sand is not that hard to remove either. But I'm getting off topic now. The second thing he acts very smart about is that there are no people seen anywhere near. Guess what? The beach has been closed for weeks now. Of course there are less people seen on the beach than usual. That doesn't mean that people didn't violate social distancing guidelines at other times over the last weeks. Also, the fact that the weather in this video was rather cloudy and it appeared that it could rain at any minute probably didn't encourage people to go to the beach at the time the footage was taken. But whatever. The last thing he gets wrong has less to do with hypocrisy, but more with sheer laziness. But the news were not even breaking at the point he retweeted it from a newsfeed called Breaking 911. The government started filling up the skate park on Thursday morning, as several news sources reported. Breaking 911 reported about it Friday afternoon, and Mr. Shapiro retweeted it about 4 hours later. Maybe you should have reported about it as soon as possible, if it was such a huge thing for you. Your personal Twitter slogan is, "Facts don't care about your feelings." Maybe you should change it into, "I don't necessarily care about facts." Number 2. Mike Barnicle replying to Ginia Bellafante. This is not actually about Mike Barnicle, but about the person he was replying to. Ginia Bellafante, a reporter of the New York Times who ran a huge, heartbreaking article about a New Yorker who died of COVID-19 after taking a cruise trip in Europe in March. Her narrative was that the media, and especially Tucker Carlson of Fox News, encouraged him to take the trip because coronavirus wasn't that bad. A very sad story, right? The problem is, this narrative is just not true. Yes, this guy died of COVID-19 after a ship cruise in Europe, but it was probably not Tucker Carlson who was to blame for this. Ginia Bellafante is referring to a quote of Carlson he made around the 8th of March. By this time, the New Yorker had already been on the ship for more than a week. And to top this off, it was Ginia Bellafante who personally downplayed the virus for weeks and even long before this guy decided to take his trip. Her most infamous tweet was made on February 27th, when she shared her disbelief that people were freaking out about this non-deadly virus. There are several other tweets she made long before the statement made by Tucker Carlson, which is still wrong by the way, in which she kept downplaying the virus. I'm not saying the death of Joy Joyce, the name of the guy, is your fault, Jinya. But if you have the stomach to blame someone else for the death of a person just to run a big story, you should certainly check your own dysfunctional behavior first. Actually, I wanted to make this number 1. But when you're talking about hypocrisy, the next guy committed an even bigger flaw. Number 1. Hypocrisy Detector. That's right, it's very easy to point out hypocritical behavior of others. But if you really want to detect hypocrisy, as you're telling everyone, you have to check your own behavior as well. So let's take a look at what you did. When Twitter user Tactical Review pointed out that not guns are to blame for killing but people with mental health issues, you were very quick in pointing out that it is more likely to blame it on guns because of the US having a much higher homicide rate than countries with stricter gun control, but about the same rate of people with mental health issues. And I think that there's nothing wrong with this statement. It hasn't been proven wrong by anyone to this date. But after a while, you started engaging into discussions about gun laws with people who were not only much more passionate about the subject than you, but probably had a decade or decades of experience in dealing with the subject. And damn, I have to admit, they whooped your ass. In the heat of the moment, you started citing several sources about gun control, homicide rates, and suicide stats, which were either not showing the whole picture or just repeating facts which have been regarded as wrong for a long time. After a while, they did you the favor of blocking you, so you didn't have to witness anymore how much they exposed your behavior. So I hope you learned your lesson. Listen to me. If you want to expose hypocritical behavior, be aware that even yourself is not always safe from engaging in it. Don't let shit like that happen again. You dumbass. So that's about it for this week's 10 most hypocritical tweets. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and if not, that you could at least take something home from it. If you missed some tweets which should have been part of this compilation in your opinion, just let me know and maybe they'll find a way into one of the upcoming compilations. I'm glad about any information about Twitter hypocrites because that could save me from a lot of work finding them. I'm planning to do these kind of videos on a weekly basis now, and I'm also planning on doing special episodes about certain people or certain media sources who regularly engage in hypocritical behavior, as well as episodes about hypocritical tweets from Germany, which is, as you probably have noticed already, my home country. You're free to follow me on Twitter or to subscribe to this channel, but it's totally fine if you don't want to. But knowing that I tell all this to someone out there and not just to myself would probably make this a lot more interesting for me. Hope to see you next week.